This is Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS, HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Montgomery Mosaic features topics of interest to Montgomery County residents, businesses, and visitors. Here now is your host, Deborah Milo.
Well, good morning, Montgomery County, and welcome to the October edition of Montgomery Mosaic. I'm your host, Deborah Milo. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you're having a great day so far in spite of the Indian summer rain that we're getting. On today's show, I'm pleased to have as our guest the Honorable Isaiah Leggett, County Executive of Montgomery County, and we're going to talk a little bit about the county's priorities. Mr. Leggett, welcome, and thank you for coming on today's show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be back.
Although your career span and accomplishments are very well known and I'm sure documented, I'd really like for our listeners to learn a little more about you, where you came from, and what inspired you to have a career in public service.
Well, it's a very an up and down life in many ways, especially the early formative years of my life. I'm not from this area of Montgomery County. I'm originally from Louisiana, one of 13 kids. Grew up in what I would consider to be abject poverty. Mm-hmm. We lived in what is now described as a shotgun house, essentially 3 rooms.
I know what that is.
Oh, yes,
I really do.
And really struggled the early parts of my life. But I was fortunate that I was lucky enough to be able to pull enough resources together, sort of big, borrowed, and stealed, and help a number of people to get into college. But one of the events that happened, opportunity to meet Dr. King. In fact, I met him twice. And I had this view about civil rights, but it really came home to me meeting Dr. King. And so in school, I became quite active as a student leader, working and participating as a leader in the early civil rights demonstrations and a number of things that occurred in and around our community. That inspired me to really seek some form of public participation as a member of our community.
Right.
But I also had another fascination, and that was military. And if someone found that somewhat contradictory in a way, because what had happened growing up in my little hometown of Alexandria, Louisiana, I never saw anyone of color in any professional position. Maybe with the exception of a minister or a teacher in school.
Oh, yes.
But no lawyers, no doctors, not a bank teller, no position of professionalism. And African Americans certainly were discriminated against and not well respected. I saw a couple of exceptions. The exception had been people I saw in military uniform. And so when I saw that, I noticed that not only the African Americans within our community, but all forms of the community really treated people in uniform with some level of respect. Not quite at the same level, but different in the way they treated other people. And so I was fascinated with that. And so not having any other role model and recognizing the treatment that had been given to people in uniform, I was fascinated that maybe that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into the military. And so I was able to combine the two at Southern by getting involved in the ROTC program and literally excelled in it.
Yeah.
And so by the time that I was a senior in college, I was the president of the student body. And I was also the brigade commander and also at one point the deputy brigade commander of the ROTC brigade. So I found myself on one hand demonstrating against, what was happening in our society, especially the war in Vietnam. On the other hand, I was in uniform preparing to go to Vietnam. And that was some early contradictory implications of my early former life.
But be that as it may to a certain degree, those life experiences and travels, I'm sure helped shape your understanding to where you are now.
Well, the conflict and balancing those two things helped me to deal with the conflicts I see now. Whether you're working with the county council, general assembly members, and people of the community, and people wanted to say, how do you balance all these things together? Well, I had a very early start at this in my life.
Yes, you did. You most certainly did, especially growing up in Louisiana.
Yes.
That's where part of my family's from.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. My mother was born in New Orleans, or excuse me, I'm saying it incorrectly.
New Orleans.
Exactly. And I have a lot of family that are still there.
Well, here's the difference now. I oftentimes meet people who say that they've gone to Louisiana. I say, oh yes, I was in New Orleans for a convention. I said, no, you have not gone to Louisiana. You've gone to New Orleans. There's a big difference between New Orleans and the rest of Louisiana. I'm from the rest of Louisiana, the real Louisiana.
Yeah, I understand. My family is from, are there in Gulfport, Mississippi, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and in Biloxi.
Okay.
So I understand. Believe me, I do. But you're right about New Orleans, though. Yeah. So tell me something. I want to talk about various priorities here in the county, beginning with which measures have been, in your opinion, most effective in putting the county on a substantial, the very sustainable foundation. Talk about that.
Well, there are an awful lot of things that we do in transportation, the environment, and most importantly, public education. But all of those really move from a foundation that we always have to keep in mind, and that is the financial integrity of the county. How do we manage our budgets? How do we prepare for reserves? How do we prioritize? Those are the things that are important.
Right.
If you don't get that right, all of the other things we've just talked about in transportation, education, public safety are going to suffer. And so my biggest emphasis has been, how do we financially provide a sustainable budget going forward for Montgomery County? How do we prepare our reserves? How do we provide and maintain our AAA bond rating?
That's
if
right.
you're able to do that, at least you're in the ballpark. You've established a foundation from which you can build on the creativity and the really good ideas that float out there. But oftentimes ideas hit the reality of not having resources to make them happen. And so you have to make sure you have the ability to make them happen. And so the biggest strength, the thing that I emphasized most importantly, was financial management and sustainable budgets. And this is why when I was selecting and putting together a county government, I selected a financial person, Tim Feinstein, to be the county chief administrative officer. And people were a little bit surprised about that. But I said, no, the challenge that we face and the challenge that this nation will face going forward are going to be primarily financial. And if we're able to get that right, then we have a better shot at getting all the other things right.
That's right. You weren't looking at just right now. You're looking at the foreseeable and the unforeseeable future.
Oh, yes.
That's what leadership does. That's exactly what leadership does. Hello again, listeners, and thank you for tuning into Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. I'm your host, Deborah Milo, and today I have the honor of talking to Montgomery County Executive Isaiah Leggett. We're talking about the county's many important priorities, and we also talked about a little bit about our connection to Louisiana, although now I know that New Orleans is not really considered Louisiana. I have to keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the library system. Tell us how the library system has improved and increased services while overcoming some economic challenges through the years.
Well, we should know that libraries are an integral part of our community.
Oh, yes.
Whether it's because you're seeking a job and you need referrals and how to fill out a resume, whether in many cases you need access to technology to help you, whether you need support for homework, whether you need community working space.
This is true.
All of those things and many others are part of what our library provides. It's an integral part of the community. And so it helps us to put into place the programs, the services, and connect people to ideas and help people to come together to formulate and to work on ideas that I believe that are important for our community. And so I look at the libraries as an integral part of so many other things that happen in the county: meeting space, technology, right, jobs, education, support, in many ways even entertainment. We bring in, one of the things that I helped start and have been very instrumentally involved in has been community conversations, where we bring in guest speakers to really talk to community members, whether or not they've written books or whether or not they come in for a particular topic, and bringing the community together to make sure that the library is an integral part of that. And so it has been my honor in many ways to try to help us to explain and to understand the significance of libraries. In fact, we won a national award in Montgomery County from the Urban Library Institute for a program that we have. It's called Refresh.
Oh, yes.
Whereby we provide the resources that are necessary to go in to make needed repairs and to upgrade libraries without literally tearing them all down and starting all over again. If you wanted to rebuild the entire library, you have to get on a schedule that may take 6 to 8, 10 years. Given
This is
the
true.
Things that we have.
Right.
But we can refresh them, and oftentimes they look almost as though they were new because we upgrade the technology. We bring in a different set of doors, and we paint it and carpet it, and when you go in, you look at it on the outside, the landscape has changed, but we have not changed the basic fundamental tenets of the building itself, the footprint, which is important. So that's a program that we've started, but more importantly, it is the people who work in the libraries, it's the leadership of our libraries,
That's right.
it is the materials that we have in the library, the technology that we have in the libraries, all of those things make, I think, Montgomery County Libraries one of the best in the nation.
I think so too, and I visit the library frequently, and I'm telling you, as growing up as a kid in the Midwest, let's just say during the mid-'70s, growing up as a kid in the Midwest, the public library was something that was a valuable institution for us.
Well, here's one thing, going back to Louisiana and the segregation, I never had that opportunity. I never had the opportunity to go to a public library. We didn't have one. There was one library that I recall that was in the white section of town that I never, ever had an opportunity to go through the doors of the library. I think at one point in time I assisted someone to help cut the grass around the library grounds, but I never had an opportunity to ever go into a public library as a young kid.
My goodness, when you decide to retire, you've got to write a book.
I will.
I'm going to definitely be the first one in line to buy your book, to say the least. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. I'm your host, Deborah Milo. My guest today is County Executive Isaiah Leggett, and we're having a very insightful discussion about the library system and the county priorities. And I just finished telling Mr. Leggett that when he retires, I really hope he writes a book, because I'll be more than happy to market that book for him and be on the actual circuit. Can you update our listeners on the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation? That's a point of interest for me also.
Well, here's what I decided to do several years ago. We had talked about how we could make our economic development efforts much more competitive. And as you know, we live in a very competitive region, and we have competition literally from all over the world that are seeking to impact things that we are looking at around this region and around the world. And I'd heard oftentimes from our business sector say, oh, well, we need to have a greater voice. We need to be a stronger input into your administration. And we need to have a bigger platform at the seat of your table. So after hearing that for a number of years and recognizing the competition that we face, I decided to do something much bolder. I said, okay, I'm just going to give you the entire table, just a seat at the table. And what we've done is to place the economic efforts of the county into the hands of a private corporation. We provide the funding. I select the members to be appointed to the board, but for all intents and purposes, they operate as a sort of a semi-autonomous board itself. And so it has worked well.
Okay.
I'm delighted with the progress that we're making. We see tangible evidence of the product. We just, as you may recall, we're able to make sure that Marriott stays in the county.
That's right. Yes.
That we've just brought over Fox News into the county.
Oh, yes.
We've just signed up and we're going to expand Discovery Communications back in Montgomery County.
Right.
And a number of other successes that we've had. It goes back a long ways. And, of course, we are fighting with our Economic Development Corporation to try to land Amazon.
And that's right.
We're fighting for it.
Well, I hope we win, to say the least.
Well, it's a big fight because...
Is it really?
Oh, yes. This is competition on steroids.
Right.
I mean, every jurisdiction in the entire country is seeking to try to land Amazon because it will come with 50,000 jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
And not only just 50,000 jobs, but the quality of the jobs that you're talking about. And so every jurisdiction out of the country is out fighting for this, and Montgomery County is part of that fight.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Leggett, when we come back from break, I want to talk further about that, because that's a lot of jobs, to say the least. Folks, this is Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. It's Deborah Milo, your host. And after a quick break, I'm going to come back and talk more with Mr. Leggett. So stay with us. Don't go away. This is a great conversation. County friends, welcome back to Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. I'm Deborah Milo, your host, and we're having a great conversation today with Montgomery County Executive Isaiah Leggett about county priorities. And Mr. Leggett, before we went to break, you gave me a shock about Amazon. That's good news.
Well, it's a very competitive process that we're going through. But I think when you look at the assets of Montgomery County, our real strong technology base that we already have, our workforce, which is so highly important, the fact that we're right here next to the nation's capital. I think when you look at the perspective that they've put out in terms of what it is that they want, Montgomery County competitively is very strong in all those areas. And so as we speak, we are preparing a very strong, aggressive effort to go forward, and we're going to be actively engaged in this competition.
That's outstanding news, to say the least. I want to ask a little bit of a lengthy question about technology. You've made such significant investments, technology upgrades, and sometimes they're not as visible as other investments like building a library or community center. But do you believe that the investments in the public safety systems, like I think it's the 911 infrastructure, public safety radio communications, do you think that's also going to be looked upon as part of your administration's legacy?
I hope so, but what I've tried to do is try to provide good public service, to try to respond to the challenges not only of today, but those that we foresee for years to come. One of the factors that we've just included in our technology upgrades, we've just made a connection basically under the Potomac River to provide Wi-Fi that would be much more direct, much more timely.
Right.
People won't see that, but I know that it's there.
Right.
The businesses and institutions that are in the county will benefit as a result of that. It would give us a more competitive edge for our businesses, make our institutions stronger. And those are the kinds of things that are important as it relates to the quality of life, making your companies much more proficient in our operation. And the average person in the public does not see that. But here's one thing that I've come to realize, that is that when people talk about legacy, it's not as important to me to have my name or label on those things. There are things that we are doing that will help the county long term, that future county executives and future council members will benefit as a result.
That's true.
My legacy in my mind is what I know that I've done. And if no one else knows it, then I go to my grave happy and satisfied that I know that I made that contribution. So I'm not one to say I need to put my signature on it and get credit for it. I know what I've done and what I've accomplished, and as a result of that, I'm satisfied with that.
And you know, the funny part is we see it every day. Like, to your point, although there are things that we don't physically see, the systems that we have in place, that's what they're all about.
I mean, let's just give an example. Years ago, we started to enhance much of our infrastructure. Many of the buildings in the county, from schools to libraries, rec centers, were all dilapidated. And during the midst of the recession, I made a decision that we would not pull back in our efforts to build, because the construction cost was lower and the ability to borrow was cheaper. So I said, in the middle of the recession, we should do something that's somewhat counterintuitive to some. That is, that we're going to go forward and build and to grow those sectors in ways which would benefit us. Good example. There was a school in Rockville called Rockville High School.
Okay,
It was built right at the midst of the recession. That school cost us $120 million. During the recession, I pushed forward an aggressive program to build. We built Paint Branch High School at $85,000.
Oh, my goodness.
So we were able to build, and as a result of that, you see coming online now close to 60 building projects of things that we were going to build at some point. I decided to build them in the midst of recession.
That's called being a visionary. That's exactly what that is. Yeah. That's understanding, like I said, you're not looking at just what is right now or what has been, and you're taking that and you're building up on that to be able to provide that level of service. And see, that's what's so wonderful and remarkable about living in this county. You know, outside of the beauty of the cultural tapestry that we've got of people from all across the world, that's part of the beauty of what we don't see, how the systems are in place. That's amazing to me. Well, folks, you're listening to Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. I'm your host, Deborah Milo, and my guest today is Montgomery County Executive Isaiah Leggett. We're having a really great discussion about some of the initiatives Mr. Leggett has put into place. I do want to talk about one thing that kind of leaves people with a question mark, and that is your processes behind moving the Confederate soldier statue. What's your advice for other jurisdictions? Because I know other jurisdictions look at Montgomery County as a role model in trying to deal with situations like this.
Well, the situation that I found Montgomery County in, that almost outside of my office, we had a Confederate statue. And I thought that it should not be at that location. It should not be on county property for which our taxpayers, all taxpayers, black, white, Latino, Asians, all were paying for it, and probably half the county objected that we had the statue in the first place. Not only that, that their tax dollars were going to help provide that statue.
That's exactly right.
Maintained.
Yes.
So I did believe that there was some historical significance in having the statue, but not at that location, not on county property. Either they should be in museums or in locations for which people can respect, honor, but it does not offend the greater number of people who may have objections. And so what I decided to do was to move it off of county property and to find a location that would be acceptable, maintaining the historical significance of it. I did not want to move it outside the county, but in a different location. Now, what I did, quietly, I had our contractors build a new platform to move the statue in Poolsville in a location at White's Ferry. Now, that is historically significant because at White's Ferry is where General Early crossed the Potomac on his way to attack Washington. So it's at a historical location.
That's right.
And so early one Saturday morning, and when there were a few people out, I'd had the contractors go out, move it. We had already built a new foundation for it. They took it out to the new foundation, put it in, and it was gone within a few hours. People woke up and it was done. And now we discussed that, and I said, well, I did not want to create a confrontation. And so if you want to say there was a little bit of lack of transparency, well, it really wasn't, because I indicated very clearly that I was going to do it.
That's right.
What was not transparent is what precise time that I was going to do it.
Exactly.
And I did it at a time that I thought was most convenient for the contractors to do it and avoid any kind of safety risk.
You also did at a time that was most appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, it
was
really...
not obstructing work that would be ongoing in the government areas of the building.
Because that's taxpayer dollars as well.
Yeah.
And so all you did is connect the dots.
Yeah. And so if you want to see it, it's in Montgomery County. It's in a different location, but you have to go to Poolsville or White Ferries to see it. Not on county property. That's
called a good strategy right there, folks. County friends, thank you so much for tuning in to Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL. This is your host, Deborah Milo, and my guest today is County Executive Isaiah Leggett, and we're having a really great conversation. And the next question I want to ask Mr. Leggett is, I want to talk about the county's crown jewel, our public schools. How do we build on what's already been considered the best?
Well, it's a challenge for us. It's a challenge because our school system is growing by leaps and bounds, about 25 to 2,600 students per year. It's the largest in the entire state of Maryland. We have challenges as it relates to maintaining the existing school physical structure as well as providing the space for additional students. But here's what we need to continue in Montgomery County. Make sure that education is a top priority.
Absolutely.
Make certain that we have the right people in place in terms of the superintendent of schools, the equipment that's necessary for our students, but more importantly, respecting all segments of our community to ensure that everyone believes that the system is responding to their needs. So when you have challenges, for example, with the achievement gap with some of our students, we have to address that, because people, if they fall significantly behind other students, it really creates a real challenge within our community.
Yes, it does.
And so we need to have a system that I think responds to that challenge, and we're doing a pretty good job of that. But I think when you look at it, there's still work ahead of us, and we need to address that concern. But overall, the system, especially compared to many others around the country, is a very good system, but it does not mean we can rest on our laurels. There are things that we need to do, and I think that we address them: smaller class size, enhanced technology, performance and efficiency of our teachers and administrators, and making certain that we have the physical space in order to do all those things, and to make sure that people understand that this system is designed to meet the needs of all students in Montgomery County.
And that's one of the most important parts, is meeting the needs of all the students in Montgomery County. Well, before we close today's show, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, but I'm curious what your plans are after leaving office. Now, I want you to know, I saw that wonderful video of you doing the Harlem Shake with the Jewish Council for the Aging.
Yeah,
and I thought you might consider a career on Dancing with the Stars.
Well, I still have another 14 months to go. But,
this is true.
And hopefully I'll be back on the program a little bit later on to talk about that. But
yes.
Right now, in terms of active politics, I think that I want to retire, do that writing that you mentioned before.
Yes.
And to relax a little bit before I decide what I want to go from here. I don't want to walk out one door immediately into another door. I want to have a clean break for some time.
I don't blame you, and I think that that's an outstanding plan, to say the least. Well, Mr. Leggett, I can't thank you enough for coming on to today's show and spending some of your time, because I know how precious your time is. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
And county friends, thank you again, as always, for tuning in and sharing your time. Now listen, don't forget to tune in again next month for another edition of Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Till next time, county friends, be good to yourself, be good to others, and please practice kindness. Bye for now.